Welcome back, guys. This video is going to be quite a bit different than what I normally do. Today we're going to be reviewing a Honda Talon side-by-side. You got the old Honda Talon with the DCT. Pretty fun to drive. Could use a turbo because of all the weight. But, this is a family cruising rig, not a, sports car. Nitrous. That could work. Or both. But, pretty cool service. URA ATV Rentals. Nice guy that runs it. Seemed to have pretty well maintained equipment, so I would recommend it. So far, so good. See if I'm saying that by the end of this video. But they really got the right tires in this thing for the environment. You don't need a mud tire here. There's really no mud. It's all just clay and rock. So these things seem to do a pretty good job. I don't know if they're good tires or not. Why don't you tell me in the comments? It's the 1000X with the Fox live valve suspension. Now I know what you're kind of thinking to yourself. Well, you don't really ever post side-by-side four-wheeler content or anything like that. And that is very true. I don't currently own a four-wheeler. I did own one 15 years ago when I was 16 or whatever. I also haven't really driven side-by-sides more than a handful of times in a handful of scenarios. This was actually probably the most seat time I've gotten in a side-by-side in forever. What this was a family trip with my parents and my girlfriend. We were in the Uwharrie National Forest, North Carolina, and we did the side-by-side rentals, which was super fun. It was a really good time. I'll put a link to the side-by-side rental company here. They treated us really well. No complaints there. But I did take a little bit of video, mostly just kind of for like family memory's sake. But then I said to myself, I actually have a very, I think, neat, unique perspective on this because most people who I feel like would be getting a side-by-side of this caliber probably already owned one or owned one in the past, and they know a lot about them and they're somewhat biased. But I can truly say that I have literally no bias because I have never, like I said, barely even driven one of these things. I had an Arctic Cat four-wheeler that I didn't really love back in the day, and I've never been like a Polaris guy or a Honda guy or a Yamaha guy. I've never really had any allegiances that way, so I have nothing for or against any of the brands. And so you're just going to kind of hear my very inexperienced perspective on it. And that might just be something you wouldn't normally hear, right? You're normally going to hear an experienced person's perspective. So if I get some stuff wrong or miss some details, I want you guys to call me out. I think it'd be kind of cool to have a back and forth in the comments. This is me learning with you guys. I don't claim to be the expert on this thing by any means. So with all that being said, here we go. First of all, these things are pretty damn cool. Just as the casual observer, I mean, they look cool. 28-inch tires, 14 plus inches of suspension travel from those Fox live valve shocks. They have super long wheelbase. It's kind of funny. It's a 116-inch wheelbase, which is, a lot of cars kind of have that much wheelbase, which is just funny for an off-roader. What used to be like a four-wheeler size thing. They've obviously grown. But, yeah, you got that 1000cc engine. Honda's typically in the past never really made the most amount of power compared to competitors for any given CC size. I would say this thing is similar in that regard. It's fine. It goes okay, but more on that later. The interesting thing about these Hondas is they've got the dual clutch transmission, which every other side-by-side pretty much and four-wheeler is a CVT. There are some exceptions, but most of them are. And that's super rare to have any type of different shifting mechanism or have a shifting mechanism at all, and I actually appreciate that because I don't know, in a sea of CVTs, it's just nice to have something different. It is a 6-speed dual clutch, which is pretty cool. And this thing weighs in at 1,700 pounds, which is, no small feat to move around, actually closer to 1,800 pounds. Holds 7.7 gallons of fuel. So, you're really getting into like car territories of weight and fuel capacity and tire sizes and maintenance costs. But that's just part of it. That's whatever. 12.4 inches of ground clearance. That's pretty good, but it does have a long wheelbase. So you're going to bottom on rocks here and there. We'll get into that more later. And yeah, overall, one other thing to consider, 64-inch width. So there are like some off-road parks I know that I believe have a 54-inch width limit, so that you can only be so wide, right? And because of that, a lot of these bigger units don't fit on those trails. Like they won't fit through these special sized kind of gates. They're basically pillars that you have to be able to get through. and so you can't fit. So that's something to consider. Depending on certain off-road parks you go to, you might have to get a thinner, like more normal old school side by side if you want to drive a side by side. I think some parks might even be as little as like, well, I don't think any of them are 4 feet because then even the bigger four wheelers wouldn't fit. But anyway, whatever the rules are, just look wherever you're planning on off roading and see if they have any width restrictions. 21.7 foot turning radius. So we'll kind of get to that later as well. And just with a kind of a quick spec rundown, I just want to do that at first, and then we can kind of discuss the unit itself. So let's start off with everybody's favorite topic, typically, which is power and handling, or sorry, like power and drivetrain transmission. So, like I said, it has that dual clutch 6 speed, and I will say, as a guy who drives a manual sports car, Chevy Camaro, as somebody who's driven a lot of automatics, I have driven a lot of CVT four wheelers, just not side by side. So I understand totally how the CVTs work, conceptually. And I have driven a couple of CVT side by sides, so I do have a feel for that on a pedal versus a thumb, lever. But I really like the dual clutch transmission. If you're doing heavy duty, like rock crawling stuff, I'm sure it's not as good. But if you want to just trail run with it, it's a lot of fun to shift on the steering wheel. Like I really enjoyed the flappy paddles. It does have paddle shifters and it's just fun. It just adds, just like in a car, it adds a little bit of an element that you don't get with a full automatic of any sort, whether it's gear or CVT based. So that was super cool. I'm definitely a big fan of that. And I think that aside from anything else in this whole video that I'm about to make, I think that might be the one thing that would push me toward buying a Honda, as long as it was at least similar in other ways to other side by sides. That being said, though, and this is where I think other side by sides definitely do a little better, is power. So this thing does not have a turbo of any sort. So unfortunately, it is just a 1,000 cc engine. But when your empty weight's 1,800 pounds, and with people in it, you're in the 2,700 pound range. Now you're asking a 1,000 cc engine to move a car, and that's not a very big engine. So obviously, you're not going highway speeds most of the time. And this thing actually will. I did it. It'll go on the road and go 65, 70. It'll get there. But it's not snappy from the low end. Like if you got a full load of people in it, it's a little bit slow. And, that is what it is. It's not meant as a 4-seater. It's not meant to be a race car, right? It's not a turbo Polaris Razor or something to that effect, right? And so it's okay that it's not as powerful, but there's just something about that little extra kick that when you're off road and you want to slide the rear end out and stuff, it is nice to have. They're 104 horsepower. I should have mentioned that before, but again, it's just like not quite enough to really make you super excited from a power perspective. So with that, that's okay. Let's move into handling, right? Maybe it handles well enough. Maybe the suspension is good enough that you just don't care. And the suspension's very good. Don't get me wrong. And listen, you're off road and you're sitting in a vehicle instead of like standing on a four wheeler, no matter what, because you don't have your legs to use as suspension as well, and your body can't flop around as easily to kind of absorb the bumps. You're going to get thrown around, and you will get thrown around in this. There was a lot of whoops and rocks and just terrain here. And if I brought the pace up a little bit, I mean, you were in rallying, right? You were as bumpy and your body was shaking around in the seat. The seats are incredibly good for holding you in. That I will say. The ergonomics are fantastic. Those seats lock you right in. But if you're older, my father, and have some ailments and such, you're probably going to find that you're a little sore the next day. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're a 20, 30, 40-year-old guy, girl, might not be as big of a deal. But if you're pushing your 50s or 60s or 70s, you're probably not going to want to drive this thing super hard and expect to be walking, normally the next day. But the Fox live valve suspension did do a great job of absorbing bumps. I do feel like the suspension was well suited for the application. I just think that for what we were doing, and I didn't see if they were adjustable. They might have had adjustable dampening and I could have played with it, but if we had been able to adjust the dampening down a little bit to make it a little bit softer ride and really try to use all that travel. So, for example, we never bottomed out once, as far as I know. And because of that, right, that probably means we were leaving some suspension on the table for those big bumps that if we had either changed the dampening or, reduced the spring rate a little bit, we could have potentially gotten a little bit smoother ride. So that's just kind of suspension 101 type stuff, right? You want to attempt to use the maximum suspension travel for the maximum scenario you plan on putting a vehicle through, but they don't know what that's going to be. And they've got to kind of plan for you to potentially jump the thing or really get the front tires off the ground over a bump and then slam it down on the ground. So that's just going to depend. Plus, the thing could be loaded, it could be empty, all that kind of stuff. But overall, I would say smooth enough ride for what it is. It's just not a smooth ride because it's not a smooth vehicle since it's an off-road UTV, right? We got to meet our expectations here. Now, as far as like interior ergos, I briefly mentioned the seat. They are very good. Like I said, the seats are awesome. The controls and stuff are all good. The door panels and whatnot do a pretty good job of keeping like big debris and stuff from getting inside. However, the reality of it is, if it's dusty, which it was, you're going to get covered in dust. You're going to get covered in rain and mud if you're going hard enough and it's rainy out or it's wet out. Hey, that's part of off-road, and I don't expect it to stop all those things. Some of the utility side-by-sides obviously have full cabs and stuff, but that's a different thing, right? They're covering you because you're doing work out of it, not, because when you're in play mode, you're going to have to expect to get dirty. It's just the way that it is. So, from that perspective, the interior is very good, and it was like ergonomic, if you will, to drive and fun to drive. Now, from I'm putting this in kind of the ergonomic section or the interior section because it kind of counts for the interior. This is a huge thing for me, actually. The dual clutch transmission, the one area where it sucks is in high range from a slow, like rock crawling-esque starts. It's herky-jerky. It's honestly not as jerky as I expected it to be, considering it's an automatic clutch, but it's not great. It's fine, but it's not great. And the more troubling issue was the brakes. So I down some real steep hills I was mashing the brakes and it did not stop nearly as fast as I felt like it should have. And at one point I almost felt like it was going to push through the brakes and just not stop going downhill. And listen, this is a rental unit. I'm sure they get driven hard and put away wet. Maybe it needed a little bit of maintenance. However, it did seem like it was in good condition, but I just think the brakes on these things might be a little bit weak. And I had noticed it other times as well. The brakes didn't seem fantastic. So that is something to consider. Do some research on that. If you're going to buy one of these, I'd love to hear in the comments if somebody owns one, what they think of the brakes. Because that really caught me off guard. I was like, wow, this just does not feel as strong as I would expect it to be for such a big, heavy vehicle. Again, we were loaded heavy. We might have technically been over payload, with 4 people in it that we had. I don't know. So keep that in mind. But, the other big factor is in the kind of this ergonomic discussion is steering and just kind of maneuvering through the woods. The steering was relatively light, so that wasn't an issue. However, that wheelbase we mentioned early on, not great. I mean, obviously, I think anybody knows that something with a 21-foot turning circle that's meant to go off-road, in a four-wheeler-esque type trail is going to have a little bit of a hard time. And there were definitely times where we had to back up, go forward, back up, go forward. But it wasn't terrible. It is a little worse than a 2-seater side by side and definitely worse than a 4-wheeler. The other big thing was because it didn't have a ton of power, you couldn't steer it with the rear tires, right? Like sometimes you'd want to just kind of tap the brake a little bit and you'd kick the rear end out on something and then you wouldn't have to, turn using the steering wheel as much and not have to do a 3-point turn, but you just couldn't do it with this thing. You could mash the gas kind of however you wanted to from a dead stop, whip the wheel, do whatever. And it was hard to drift on sticky ground, right? If you were on mud or something, I'm sure it would, but didn't have a lot of low end torque. And in low range, which I did put it in low range, it still didn't have a ton of low end torque. It was better. It was definitely better, but then it gets more herky jerky because you have a lower gear ratio and you're running the CVT or the dual clutch transmission. So again, none of these things are deal breakers, but just differences and things to consider, maybe compared to another side by side if you guys are going to look at one. Yeah, so I think that kind of wraps up my overall thoughts as far as like what else I would want to see in it, what I would change. Well, I'm sure everybody says this type of thing, but I'd add a little bit of power. That's for number one. Um, I'd also probably, well, I would definitely increase the braking ability, put bigger brakes on it. Um, I don't know. It'd be cool if it was lighter, but if it had more power, I guess I don't really care that it's heavy. And I don't think that's realistic anyway. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I liked it. I liked it a lot. I would probably rate it overall like a 7 out of 10. I mean, it was most of the way there. It is unique. It was a very fun day, very fun experience. I could see myself owning one and enjoying it. Um, I just kind of wanted to put this video out and give you guys my full review. So hopefully this helps someone. Again, I'm pretty inexperienced on these things. I thought that might be a cool perspective. Let me know in the comments what you think. Hopefully, if somebody who owns one chimes in, and I'd love to hear your opinion. So, as always, guys, thanks for watching. God bless America, and I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.